All right, cool. So we'll just kick it off. We'll have one of those old-fashioned, laid-back conversations about prison violence. What say you?
Whatever you, and nothing's off limits, bro. Nothing,
Awesome, man.
nothing off limits.
Very cool. Well, it's great to have you back in Wenz World, kid. It's been a while, and I've been digging into this book. I am a slow reader, but when I read, I have to reread because my brain will get sidetracked, and I'll go three places, and I'm like, wait a minute, I got to get back to this at hand, right? So I'm finally done, man. It's been months, so I appreciate your patience. I promise to have you back, so we're making good on that. But I want to start from the beginning because last time we talked on the last episode of Wenz World featuring Kit Cummings, we talked about your journey, right? But I want to take it back to over a decade ago where something really special happened in 2011. You and 12 other guys who were kind of sick and tired of being sick and tired of how things were going in America's correctional facilities. Can you speak on that? What brought you to that point with your own personal walk, your ministry, and where you found yourself purpose wise in this world?
Yeah, and thanks for having me back on the Wenz World. I love it, and I had a great time the first go around. So I appreciate you being gracious, inviting me back. Yeah, it was kind of the perfect storm in a good way. I mean, I was going through kind of what I call a dreamless state of life after having a big dream for a number of years when I was preaching full time and actually leading churches. And then that came to an end just as life happened, a lot going through different things and wound up on a different path. And so for 4 or 5 years, I was just hustling, doing things that I didn't enjoy. I hadn't done that in my career, having to work jobs that I didn't like. And so a lot of people, God bless them, are in that situation where you just got to hustle for your family, and you really hadn't found that thing maybe. Well, I was thrown into that, and it helped me be a lot more compassionate, for people that are in that grind. But for me, I was miserable because I love to speak, I love to preach, I love to teach, I love to create, and so the magic happened, like what you're talking about. Really, it was in 2008. I started to wake up a little bit, wanted to speak again, started doing some things motivational, I guess would be more kind of what that was, and creating kind of some principles that would become the foundation that I teach from. And then started working with a kid that I knew when he was little, and he was all grown up and in big trouble, gang leader, gang related murder charge. Really just started working with him for a couple of years, just trying to help him, save him. And I don't mean save him, I mean just save his life. And then, but that's what got me into this whole gang work, was working with him. And he started teaching me things about this dark underworld that you can't learn if you're just a civilian. And then I taught him things that kind of set him free for a lot of things. And so anyway, that set me up. When I walked into my first prison, I didn't know what I didn't know. I just knew that magic had happened with this kid I'd working with. And so I was expecting it again. And I didn't know it was Georgia's worst prison. I didn't know that most of the guys I was going to get close to were heavy guys, gang guys. It just happened. And so I had this small group of guys that I would meet with on Tuesdays. And, I was just teaching them the things that I had developed, and I called it attitude science. And so it's kind of 12 principles that I developed for myself, to kind of help me stay on the beam and to get back on when I fall off. And just attitude being the way you see the world, and the way you see the world is everything. And no two people have the same lens. And so these are the kind of the foundational things. And I started working with guys in a prison, never had taught these things to them. And it became a very special day on Tuesdays at 4 o'clock at Hays State Prison. And I had, about 12, 15 guys on a given Tuesday. And, we had black, white, and brown. We had guys that were connected to the Bloods. Well, I think we had a Crip. I think we had a couple of Gangster Disciples. We had a Muslim brother. We had an Aryan Brotherhood guy that would visit every now and then. We had a Latin King. So it was just like this, perfect petri dish, a laboratory to try my things in a very tough environment. Somewhere along the way, we started just talking about, what would it look like, if Hays became a peaceful place, which was, everybody laughed. There's no way. Hays is the worst, last stop on the block. And I went to a conference in Philadelphia, and I had started doing some prison stuff. And so I was invited to talk about it at a big nonprofit conference. And that's when my idea arrived. It was in Philadelphia. It's 2010. And it was right at the end, it was December. And it was coming up on MLK Day, the 25th anniversary of his holiday. And, Dr. King has been a very, very big influence in my life. And so the presenter after me, who was the host of the conference, he challenged everybody, go back to your cities and do something in honor of Dr. King for his birthday, and his holiday. And so I was like, perfect. So all of a sudden, boom, idea arrived. And, you're going to have 50,000 of them today, unique thoughts popping, what I'm saying? And I'm fascinated with the brain. And so I was paying attention when that one arrived, and it was, we could do a peace movement in honor of Dr. King at this prison. It'd be perfect. And so I went back, I got on the plane, I started scribbling down some notes, which became, eventually 7 steps. And I just quickly put together this little book for him. And it was Gandhi, King, and Mandela. And I drew quotes from each of them, and then action challenges, 40 days in a row. And then a little small group component on Tuesdays, we would discuss, one of the principles. And the warden had not given me permission to do it. He said I could do whatever I want to in that little group, but he told me not to do it to the general population. And so I wasn't planning on it, but that group they wouldn't shut up. They went out and started talking about it. And then people started coming, wanting to be a part of it, and then, one of the guys, Andre, that became a very significant guy in my life, he went out and started kind of recruiting and bringing gang leaders to me, using his influence. And it just kind of became a thing. The warden had to let me do it because he couldn't really stop it. And so he had me manage it. And so that led to a Friday morning meeting with 15 of some of the heaviest guys in the prison. And we had what became like a peace council with all the different gangs represented. I didn't have a clue what I was doing, Joey. It was just like, I was thrown into something. There was no guards in the room, which was crazy to put these guys in a small room. And we just started kind of negotiating different things, come up with ideas, and something would happen, and we'd bring it to the table, and violence wouldn't happen. They'd put things down. They'd call off hits. They would put down potential riots. And I was onto something. And then that prison became very peaceful for a big portion of that year, 2011. And it won Institution of the Year that year in the state of Georgia out of 27, 28 prisons. That kind of put me on the map. So, that was a very, very significant development.
Yeah, you can't argue with the results from worst to first, right? Riots were put down, hits were called off, and assaults on officers and inmates declined rapidly. When you talked about like the prison mentality and the need for an action challenge and applying attitude science to that, how hard is it initially to not only get all of these men who have their differences just because of how they've identified themselves as individuals, and then apply a foreign concept and convince them to not kill each other for 40 days? Also, why the number 40 in particular?
Good. I'll do the last one first. So 40, my base is my foundation is spiritual. I live, basically, I believe that people ought to see my faith and not have me have to tell them about it. And so if somebody watches my life and my work, hopefully they'll be able to figure out who I follow. You know what I'm saying? And if they want to know, I'm all in. I don't keep it a secret, that Jesus changed my life, but I'm not a religious guy. I gave that up. That almost ruined me. It suffocated me, religion, the binding ties of religion, and broke free from that. So mine is not maybe typical, but he's my standard. And so 40 is a very biblical number. And I'm big into numbers, numerology. I'm not kind of crazy into it, but the numbers are significant to me for some reason. And 40 is the number of transformation, and usually through trial and temptation, and then it's whether they wandered 40 years in the desert. Jesus was 40 days, without food, being tempted, and it was, Noah, 40 days and 40 nights. And there's so many 40s in the Bible. So I loved it. And with the brain, typically 30 days is enough to at least break a habit and start a new one. If you continue it, the brain will let go after a month or so. but then you've got to continue it or it'll gravitate back to whatever your habits were. So I thought, well, let's just say 40 instead of 30. Let's really reinforce it. And so that's what we did. The question is a good one. How do you get them to do that with this is such a foreign concept? In the adult facilities, you'd be surprised. If you can get their attention and hold it and give them a good enough reason, they will try something, because anything to break the monotony, nothing is ever new. They don't have anything to look forward to. It's the same every day, same food every day, get up at the same time, chow at the same time, go to bed at the same time, same people every day, nothing new, which is very hard for human beings. Usually get in trouble. Put me in a situation like that, bored, nothing to do, and everybody around me in a bad mood, and I'll get in trouble too. It's just like that's what happened. And so bring in something fresh, that's for them, and they will dig into it. I mean, even really hard guys. And I've figured out a way to get their attention and to hold it. But I've felt the same way. It's like, dang, I mean, why these guys embrace this thing? The younger generation that I'm focusing on now, I'm working at a juvenile prison in Georgia. Every week I go down to a place called Eastman, and it's a little bitty town where they build prisons, and this one's a juvenile prison. It happens to be the worst one in the state. This time I'm contracted with the state of Georgia. Never have been. I always worm my way in, do my thing, and then they'll kick me out or whatever happens. But now I'm partnered with the DJJ, very cool with the commissioner, have a 12-month contract with a 4-year extension. Things go well. So I'm not in a hurry. And so on Wednesdays, I drive down there 3 hours down, hang out with these boys. There's about, 55, 60 of them, and in 4 different dorms. And 2 of those dorms are toughest kids I've ever worked with. And I've worked with a lot of tough kids. I've done a lot of work in Ohio in the juvenile system, and I thought I worked with some tough kids up there. These kids, man. Plus, it's been 5, 6 years. Believe it or not, that's a lot. That's a generation. I mean, the 17-year-old mind 7 years ago, probably 2013, 2014, we're talking about almost 10 years ago, is different. I mean, believe it or not, it's changed that much in a decade. So the 16, 17-year-old mind now, they've got no code, no rules, totally impulsive, only what's in front of them. And I mean, it's especially these kids that are in the gang life. And so I'm having to recreate myself in many ways to get their attention and hold it. And it's good for me, because once again, I've thrown myself into a place where I'm not comfortable, and I've got to do really good work. And if it doesn't work, I've got to create solutions. And that's what's happening right now.
I just feel the tension as you're talking, not necessarily between you and those you partner with, but the tension of outside people looking in, being skeptical, thinking like, well, if this guy came in and perhaps offered me the ability for the courts to reconsider my case or my time in here, and is a change of heart really possible? It sounds like a bunch of after school special stuff, but you can't argue with results, right? Worst to first in Georgia's worst prison. You've turned thousands of lives around, not only inside the walls, but outside the walls, which is really kind of maybe an unintended consequence, but everything that starts within ends up outside. And I think that's why you focus not only on those inside the walls impacting the generations outside, but also the inward change that manifests itself in behavior. So I want to talk about the code that you referenced earlier, because in a dark underworld, as you called it, there is a code. It's a code to help you freaking stay alive, right?
Mm-hmm.
You end up in there, maybe you haven't gone through the juvenile system, you don't know how to play the game. But in prison, there's a whole different kind of rules, and not necessarily the ones that we've seen on Netflix benders, So I'd love for you to kind of share the real life inside the most dangerous prisons, the dark underworld, as you called it. And then also the new convict code that you've brought in that has essentially transformed a broken system.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you. The new convict code, the reason I said the new is we're trying to tweak the old code, because the old code is not going anywhere, and in a lot of ways it shouldn't. It is the way you've got to make a system that's very unpredictable somewhat predictable. You've got to figure out, okay, what are the rules of this game? Because it is a game. Okay. And so everybody has some sort of code they live by. It's their standards. What do you allow? What do you not allow? What do you let people get away with? What do people not get away with? You know what I'm saying? What is your standard? What is your code? When somebody does this, you do that. And it can be, with everything, good, bad, whatever. And so the convict code is a way of doing life behind that wire. So if somebody, like you said, doesn't have any experience, these kids I'm working with have been locked up in and out since they were 11 or 12. They ain't afraid of going to jail. They ain't afraid of going to prison. As a matter of fact, they expect it. It's part of the game. They know it. They know death is a part of the game. Their life expectancy on the streets these days in the gang life is 25. If they make it to 30 and on, it's because they're locked up. If you grow old in the gang life, it's because you're locked up. It preserves your life. If you stay on those streets, there's an expiration date, and you're probably going to die in your 20s. And so they understand that game. They know that jail's part of it. But then there's a lot of people that get caught up in stuff they're not ready for, and they have to go to a place they're not built for. They are afraid of prison, and there's a lot of people in there that are afraid to be there. And so it's not a matter of, are you willing to live by the convict code? It's you better learn it fast.
Right.
You better get good at it, because this is how it is. And so it's just this unwritten set of rules. I mean, how do you look at a dude? How do you not look at him? All right, that's a big deal.
Right.
If you look away and will not look at them, that communicates something. If you look too long, that communicates something. I mean, it's like everything matters. And so well-meaning people would be like, just keep your head down and mind your own business. Well, I appreciate the advice, but you don't have your own business. You don't have any alone time. You're always with people. And if you're locked down in your cell, there's a cellmate, and it's a small cell, with a toilet right there, a little sink right there, a couple of bunks, a couple of little desk areas. That's it. And you do life in there. When you're outside, you're in a dorm, all eyes on you. When you're going to chow, you're in a line, all eyes on you. When, store call comes and maybe you have some money on your books, everybody's watching what you're buying, because you might be a paycheck for somebody, if they can get to you first. And so, I mean, it's a code. For instance, if let's say that you buy a fan, and I reference this in the book, and the fan is a pretty high commodity because there's no air conditioning in most of these dorms. In Georgia, it can be 100 degrees in there. You don't have a fan, that's a big deal. So you get a fan, and everybody knows it, because nowadays they bring the store to the dorm because not a lot of movement in these maximum securities. And so now everybody in the dorm knows you got a fan. A lot of those guys don't have a fan. So let's say that you go to chow and somebody goes in there and helps themselves to your fan and steals it. You would think it's like, well, too bad for you. Convict code says you're not allowed to do that. And so the whole dorm will get that fan back for you and give it back to you, because that's called sneak stealing. Sneak stealing can bring heat on everybody else. Okay, so they don't allow it. So the convict code says that if you want his fan, you got to go to him and say, I'm going to take your fan. And you give the guy a chance to defend the fan. And if you're not willing to fight, let's say the guy that comes to you is scary, and it's like, I will never make it a minute against that guy. Well, you've got a decision to make. And if you decide, take the fan, dude, all right, you lost your fan, but you also now are what they call a free pick. And it means that everybody knows that you don't fight. And so they're going to take everything. They're going to start saying, hey, every week, here's what you're going to do. You're going to buy me this and this and this from the store, and I ain't asking. And so, because they don't have a money line coming in maybe from the free world. And so that's just the rule of the land. It's like, you better fight for your fan, or else that's the kind of time you're going to do. Free pick. And so, there's a host of things like that make this code. And really, it's a code from the streets. Okay, so now I also speak to this. The convict code that was built for prisons is now out on the streets too. And one of them is, if somebody challenges you, and they call it tries you, you've got one response. You better go hard, and you better go as best as you can for as long as you can, and make a statement that I'm not a punk. I challenge that. And I start to teach them things like, all right, if you've got a bunch of buttons on your chest and it's like one of those guys is like, give me a reason, I'm ready to go up
Right,
to
right.
do what you got to do. And then I come along and push your button and you've got no choice but to fight. And then that fight gets you put in the hole. And if it goes bad enough, it might catch you some new charges, which could lead to some more time. Okay, then you're my puppet. I just pushed your button and made you go to the hole because of this code. And I start challenging that. And I'm saying, which guy's more powerful? The guy that has 3 soldiers and he can order a guy to go jump on a dude, or the guy that has so much power that he can tell everybody to lay it down and say no violence in my dorm? Which one's got more power? And they're like, the dude that can bring the peace. I'm like, right. Which one do you fear more? The guy who's running his mouth all the time, or the guy who's over in the corner just kind of watching everybody? And they say the dude that's quiet because we don't know where he's at. I'm like, okay, well then do you understand how this code is not as concrete as it seems? So we start teaching them to use their minds, to pause when a guy tries them, just keep your mind, keep your cool, look them in the eye, don't back down, use your brain. And the next thing you say is important. Something like, okay, right now, don't take, this is not weakness. This is strength. And I'm going to ask you something. And you start using your words. And then you do it right. And you've got an ally instead of an enemy. And you didn't lose respect. Those are the things that we started doing early on. Is, can you handle conflict in a nonviolent way? Let's do a test and see if there's a way to do it where you don't lose respect and you don't go the hole or catch more charges or whatever. So, kind of I'm going all around the horn, but it's kind of like that.
Oh, that's a lot to take in. And as you talk about this like code of ethics, right, that keeps it all together and bringing some structure or some soundness to it, the unpredictability of it. Again, you also brought in some external circumstances that us in the free world can't relate to, right? I can hop in my car. I can get up when I want. I can go to sleep when I want. I don't have to be surrounded by people while I'm using the bathroom. You know what I mean? Like those simple things, just privacy, man, that could be so overlooked because we're just used to it, right? But then I think about the actual system, right? The actual system that has placed over 2 million of United States citizens in, right?
Yep.
What, 25% of the world's incarcerated come from America
Yep.
alone? And we
Yep.
represent what, 5% of the overall population? So there's something there, right? So how did we land here? Broken families, dad's missing, mom's at work, grandparents are raising the kid, latchkey kids. So the gangs come in, they offer the kids stability in an unstable world. They give them power, they give them money, they give them respect. A lot of those things that these kids have never tasted. Maybe they give them the influence that these kids crave. Maybe this has been sold to them. So how do we kind of take it back, maybe a 1,000-foot view here? How do we make violence not so damn sexy on the outside to keep these kids from making choices that will land them inside?
Oh, that's a great question. That is the game. That's what I'm going to work trying to figure out right now. Because in the adult prisons, man, we have a way to do it and it flat works. Okay, I know that. I've seen it too many times. In the juvenile system, it can work if you have enough support from administration, staff, if they're already somewhat, have access to program. Right now, I'm working with kids that don't have anything. They just locked down all the time and they're dangerous kids. And so I'm having to really recreate that. On the streets, it's a whole different animal right now because the older guys on the streets have just basically washed their hands of the young ones. Like you can't, they're impossible. I don't believe that, but I'm having to really, they're so unpredictable. I mean, this was telling. It was probably a 17, 18-year-old kid, and it was in the prison a couple of weeks ago. I said, hey, when you go back home, would you invite me to your house, to your neighborhood? And they're like, no, you don't want to come to my house. You don't need to come to my neighborhood. And I said, why not? And they said, too dangerous for you, man. And I said, why? Would you vouch for me? Yeah. I said, well, your vouch doesn't count in your neighborhood. If you vouch for me, why am I in danger? You know, I'm trying to show them the power of that vouch, you know, and they said, I can't tell you exactly how they said it, but basically they said it's because of the young ones, and you don't know what they're gonna do. A 17-year-old was telling me, watch out for the young ones. Okay, think about that. I'm talking about 13, 14-year-olds, right? See, if now these little ones, 13, 12, 13, 14, they'll give them a gun and have
Right.
them do something because they can catch a charge, and they're young. They're not going to do a life sentence. They're not going to, you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And they are just like push a button and tell them where to go. And they're also in a world where they're seeing there's no rules. It's like Wild Wild West. And so I've got to come up with different plans when I'm working in the free world in some of these areas, because you cannot predict these young ones, which is very, you know, it's complicated. I'll tell you one. So how do you make, you know, the violence less sexy? That's a great question, because we're competing against, I'm telling you, it's overdone because you hear grown folks say it all the time, but the music is very important.
Amen, brother.
Their music is getting more and more and more gangster, more violent, and it's numbing the mind to violence. The video games, you know, again, don't play those video games, Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty or whatever it is. It's numbing them to violence that should shock people. I don't play video games, you know, so if I did play Grand Theft Auto or watched, I'd probably be shocked that you just shot a cop full of holes. You know, you just went into a strip joint and did, you know, and this is a 14-year-old kid
Right,
that's
right.
living life in his imagination through that little character.
Mm.
So we're competing against some things that are dull in their minds to things that ought to shock them, that aren't natural. There's no empathy. Empathy is everything. If I can stab you and not feel your pain, okay, so that is, it's becoming pathological. There's problems in the brain with empathy, which is huge. So I mean, I'll just throw it out there. I mean, this is so fresh and it's ridiculous. When I go down there tomorrow, I'll be in the prison tomorrow with those kids. I'm gonna try a new approach. I'm gonna say, and this might jump off a new work, you know, that I'm working on with my son, but I'm gonna say, here's what I really admire about you guys, the young generation. Man, you're courageous. You ain't afraid to die. You ain't afraid to go to prison. You know, some kids aren't afraid to kill. It's like, you know, they ain't afraid. They're willing to do whatever it takes to get what they want. Okay, that's something we can work with.
Yeah,
There's
redirect it.
a lot of people in the free world that don't have that thing right there.
Mhm.
They are afraid. They're not willing to do what it takes to get what they want. So they just stay stuck in life, safe and not taking chances, afraid to fail. So these kids are not that. They're unified in a certain extent. You know, we might say that's not family, that's not real love. Well, if I told you and I meant it, Joey, I'll die for you, bro. Okay, even if you and I are doing some bad things, there's some kind of love there. I'll
Oh
die for
yeah,
you. I'll
that's a
kill for
bond.
you. I
Yeah.
will kill for you. Think about how strong that bond is. So I admire that about them. It's like, and I'll tell them, man, you guys understand commitment, loyalty to one another. Y'all understand respect. You guys are honest. Do you know that prison is a very honest place?
You have to almost have to be, right? Because
Well,
people
there's
are watching.
no reason to lie. I mean,
Yeah.
these guys I work with, why would they lie to me? What they got? So they're going to be honest. I get lied to in the free world. I get lied to by churches. I get lied. See, where there's no consequence for lying, we tend to lie.
Mm.
But in there, there's a big consequence for lying. So I'm going to start with all the things I admire about them. And then I'm going to say, but you know, one thing, you know, what the knock on y'all is? You're terrible businessmen. Nobody has ever taught you how to do business. And your only strategy of business is eliminate the competition. And think about what it does. Okay, when you guys go ham on somebody, do something stupid, and they lock you down, do you know the only ones that are suffering is you? Nobody else. The staff
There's.
isn't, nobody else. When y'all
Mhm.
act out and won't go back in your cells and they got to come in and use force to put you in there just because you're trying to cause trouble and you're locked down for 3 days, who's suffering? You just gave all the officers a day off. And so it's like, and this isn't, I haven't made much traction with this yet. But then again, I haven't been with them for that long. These kids happen to be Bloods. They're all part of the same set under the same blood I won't say what the set is, but very dangerous set
Yeah.
on the East Coast. And so they got no rules. They just do what they want to do. They got the guards scared. You know, they run the place in a lot of ways, so they just get them locked down all the time. So what I'm trying to teach them is, look, every time y'all do that, okay, how is it working for you? You've got a transaction here. You're doing this, you're receiving this. Okay, so when y'all are acting a fool, they come and shake down your rooms and try to find things that you don't want them to find. You get isolation, which is terrible for your mind
Yep.
and what it does to you.
Proven.
You know, you lose privileges. You don't get to go to do rec. You don't get to go, you know, see a movie every now and then or get whatever. And so on the streets, if you're working a corner and you're worried about somebody coming by and just lighting up your corner, because that's the way it works in your, do you understand how you guys have not figured out business? And then I start teaching them about money. It's like, how much money would be enough? Let's say $100,000. How would that be? And they're like, done. And I'm like, okay, what would you do with it? Where would you put it? You can't put it in a bank. If you deposit anything more than $9,999, it gets flagged. Okay. And people, they look into where's that? That's cash. And so you can't put it in a bank. You got to hide it somewhere in your house. Okay, well, now it's a threat. Somebody knows you got some money, they will come and get it. There's no loyalty in the streets, not when it comes to money. Okay, so what you gonna do? What kind of car would you drive? Man, I would drive a da da da. Really? How you gonna buy it? If you steal it, you can't keep it. You got to chop it up and sell it. Okay, you can't keep a car you steal.
Right.
So that means you got to buy it. You can't buy it through a bank, can't get a loan. You have to do a cash deal. And now all of a sudden, everybody in the neighborhood knows you've got a nice, fat, dope car. Guess what? Somebody wants that thing. You can't even drive it. You know any OGs that have big, huge houses on the hill? No, they live in little apartments and they move around a lot, even though they got more money they can spend. Can't put it in a bank, can't buy a house with it. So you can't even live like you want to live, like this hip hop superstar that you want to be like. Well, guess what? His money is one he keep in a bank. He can get a loan. He can, you know, he's a businessman. And so I'm going to try to enter their minds in that place, which is learn how to be a businessman. You'll stay alive. And maybe you have an exit strategy. You know what I'm saying? What if you learn how to use money to make money? What if you learn how to be an Amazon seller? What if you learn crypto? What if you learned how to hustle and in ways that could help you keep your money? Maybe if you then learn how to invest through Robinhood or whatever it is, it's like, this is, I mean, they're going to look at me like I'm crazy, but I'm just starting to help them understand that, man, there's some things you could learn, because I need them to settle down for a minute and let me teach them. Last week, they came after me and they just acted a fool and I wasn't able to teach. We were in a big debate all day long. And so anyway, I know I'm rambling, but how do you do that? That is the game right there, bro. When you said, how do you make violence less sexy? I don't know that I haven't answered that yet. I'm working on it. But right now it's like, be a smart businessman, because every time you guys, engage in violence or violence happens, just bad things happen to you. It never works out for you well.
Yeah, and you talked about like they have the passion, they have the energy, they have the chutzpah, and you talked about, kind of redirecting that to a path that'll benefit them. You're not trying to hold them back. You're trying to help them. You're trying to save them their earthly life on this side of the wire, because it can get dangerous, right? Like a third of them go in non-violent and 2/3 of them come out violent. So it
Right.
tells you something about what happens in there. It
True.
also kind of struck me when you talked about the business of prison, core civic, with profits in the millions, if not billions. And we're talking about a complex that literally builds and guarantees filled beds. Okay, from a business to consumer standpoint, you're entering in a space that you're disrupting $1 billion industry, Kit. Do you see that for what it is? Do you realize that although on a small scale, the guards and the wardens and the COs, they love you because you're bringing peace to their spot. But in the overall scheme of things, in a system that's privatizing these transactions more and more, do you ever feel the pressure, not only from maybe a religious community for you to align with them, but also from higher powers, on a more national level? Does that ever get to you?
Well, it's a cost to count, I would say. I'm involved in a documentary right now that we're producing, and it's about the U.S. prison industrial complex. The director, we were shooting a week ago Sunday, and it's free flow. By design, she didn't want me to have the questions ahead of time. She wanted it to be spontaneous and really just kind of fresh. And so it was good. And then it got to the last question, and she said, okay, here's what I want you to discuss. And so she would set up the question, and then I would just kind of repeat the question and then flow, because in the film, you're not going to be able to hear the interviewer, right? And so she said, I want you to talk about this. Are you willing to do whatever it takes to reform this broken system? And she said, I mean by this is the powers that be control access, and they're going to be cool with you as long as you play well within their game. So, and she said, you're going to obviously help a lot of inmates that are going to come through, and it's going to change life for them, but it won't really change the system, because those that really change things rock the boat and become troublers. And I just smiled. I was like, well, here we go. And so it was a great question. And so I said, wow, am I willing to do whatever it takes? And I told her, I said, I've been kicked out 3 different times in my own state by 3 different commissioners for a program that lowers violence. And I'm not breaking their rules. And it's always something different. It's never a violation, something I did. It's one time it was budget cuts. And I was like, y'all don't even pay me. How can you kick me out for budget cuts when you're not paying me? That was before, the state started paying me some. And another time it was something out of my control with another gang. Another time it was something that somebody did, they shouldn't have. It's just that it makes them nervous. Okay, when this program brings together rivals and teaches them how to use their collective influence to lower violence so that they can do easier time.
Bad for business, Kit. It's bad for business. If you think about it, we got a lot of customers, man, entering that store, leaving that store a lot later than they'd like to. But the stuff you talk about in this book, man, it's real. They want repeat offenders. They want people to fail. The system is designed, unfortunately, for failure because there's money to be made. And so that's the root of my question there. And the fact that you're willing to take that on is absolutely huge. You've even said in your book, I love going to prison. And I'm not shocked why people are puzzled by this, because I was puzzled by it. One thing I want to say about along those spiritual lines, we're not necessarily a religious show, but unapologetically a sinner, right?
Yeah.
Saved by grace.
Yeah.
But I love how you talk about the things that God uses, the despised things of the world to point people toward him. And ultimately, there is a strong connection between your program and redirection and hope. So whether you probably catch a little heat from people outside of the Christian faith, because it is weird. There is this expectation that if you're a Christ follower, you, whether quietly or publicly, denounce all over their face because Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Maybe there is room for synergy. Maybe there's room to learn from Buddhist teaching, from people like Gandhi. Heck, not everything about my life reflects him. So I do think there's truth in that a crooked stick can still lead people toward truth. How has that resonated with your program?
Great question. Yeah, and just kind of tie up the last question and segue into this one. That's what will be hard if I decide, okay, it's time. Like I've been in over 100 of them, prisons, jails, detention centers across the country and on 4 continents. I've seen the ugliness. I've seen the darkness. I've seen the abuse. I've seen this broken system that's designed to fail and keep people down. It's $100 billion industry. They're making products that are sold on the free market here in my own state. They don't pay them a dime. It's slave labor. Okay, but I love them so much that it would break my heart if I couldn't go see them anymore. And so, but when it comes time, and I guess it'll become evident that I need to go ahead and get a bigger microphone, a bigger stage, and say, okay, it's on now. And I said it in that interview. I said it with a lot of passion. I said, governors and commissioners out there, I want to be your friend. I want to help. I have a solution, but you keep kicking me out, and we're going to start talking about this. And so, but that would be very, very hard. The faith component is a very good question, because I figured out early on, if it's just a Christian program, you get the same 10% dudes in every prison, and you got 90%, especially the ones that are tearing things up. They're not trying to come to church. In a prison, bad things happen at church a lot of times. Deals are made at church. Liaisons happen at church. There's just, I mean, it ain't, then go to church. Sometimes I say pump the brakes. I mean, you might not need to go to church. You might just need to do that by yourself. Everything's upside down in there. But I was doing my thing in Michigan, and two significant things happened there. One, Dearborn, Michigan is the #1 place in the country that has the biggest gathering of Muslims. And it's because they're Iraqi refugees that came after the first Iraqi war, and they stayed. And now a lot of people from the Muslim faith, they come to Detroit, because it's kind of a place that you drive through Dearborn, and everything, all the signs are in Arabic, and everybody speaks Arabic. It's a Muslim town. I went there and I just wanted to see people, meet people, and experience it. So in Michigan, anyway, if you don't, well, not everywhere, Muslim faith is very attractive in prison because it has structure, discipline, and men want that. It's like, for people that want that, it's even more attractive than the Christian faith for a lot of men on the inside. But I knew if I don't win the Muslims, I can't bring peace to the prison. Okay, so in Michigan, it took a minute, but I won the respect of the Muslim brothers, and especially their leaders. And the way that I did it is, Paul said, I become all things to all men so that I may win some. He said, to the Jew, I became a Jew. To the Greek, I became a Greek. To the Gentile, I became a Gentile. To the weak, I became weak. And I thought, that's the answer right there. So to the Muslim, I became a Muslim. And I said, teach me Islam, to the imam. And then he would let me start to teach things. And I realized that we had a lot more in common than what separated us. People don't know that. And so I didn't change what I believe or my convictions, but I welcomed all faiths. And so in my books, my curriculum, I put, Gandhi, Hindu, King, Southern Baptist, Mandela, maybe Methodist. He didn't talk much about it. Thich Nhat Hanh, Buddhist, Dalai Lama, Buddhist, Albert Einstein, Jew, Rabbi Heschel, Jew, Malcolm X, Muslim, Maya Angelou. I just, Black Elk, Native American spiritualism. I included all the kind of the worldwide faiths, so that it was a program. It's like, come one, come all. We're coming together in peace. And so, like I said, if people don't know who I follow, if they hang out with me, then I got to figure out what am I doing wrong. If I don't remind them of somebody, then that's on me. I shouldn't have to run around telling everybody. And so I designed it that way on purpose to include, and that made all the difference. The other thing was, I had like this big mega church giving me 40, 50 volunteers, to help, because it was in Michigan. I can't stay up there for 8 weeks at a time. So I go in and launch it, provide videos, come back at the end, have a big celebration, which are off the chain. And I needed volunteers to kind of help facilitate the small groups. Well, that did not work out well, because as much as I tried, God bless them, I couldn't get the Christian volunteers to stop proselytizing. And I would tell them, this is not time to preach Jesus, even though I love Jesus. This is not time to go try to convert and save people. And it started causing a problem, especially with the Muslims. They would get up and leave every time. They can't participate in a group prayer. They pray in their own way. So all of a sudden you'd have a bunch of Muslims leave. And I'm like, this is not the way it's supposed to be. And they dug in, and finally we had to come up with a new way. And so I developed peer facilitator relationships, where a group of 12 men in a circle, 2 of them are program savvy. They know how a program works. They've had enough, but they're not over anybody. And the program got more effective when I let the brothers kind of start working with and leading the brothers. So that's important. But the scripture that you referenced, man, God will use the lowly and despise things of this world to shame the wise. I find more faith in prisons a lot of time than I do in the free world, more courage for sure. Respect, I learned respect behind the wire. I learned loyalty behind the wire. I learned integrity, my word, behind the wire. In the free world, those are just words a lot of times, because there's no consequences. So I find a faith and honor in there that people don't even understand that side of it.
This is really interesting to me. We touched on it a little bit earlier. We asked the question, how do you make violence less sexy? You know, so that people outside the wire don't find themselves in, because you're trying to coach the people inside the wire to help those without, so they don't end up landing in there. But let's talk about something that you really dig into, and it's uncomfortable, right? But we've seen a lot of this. We've also seen a group of protesters. So most of them in there might be about the struggle. There, you got some knuckleheads mixed in. So with that said, how do you separate the wheat from the chaff? And if you are the wheat, how do you present yourselves in such a way in these groups to be taken seriously and not be viewed as a bunch of thugs and hooligans is trying to destroy property?
Yeah, man, that's so it's still very relevant. When we first started talking, oh my gosh, in summer of 2020 and throughout the rest of that year, a lot of people saw things happening that we hadn't really seen since the 60s, late 60s. And so for those who've been around for a minute, it was like, oh no, here we go again. And for a lot of people, it was like, oh my gosh. And some people think, the sky is falling, Armageddon, this is the end of the world. And it's like, well, in the 60s, we witnessed on TV a president getting his head shot off. Okay, we hadn't seen that. Then his brother started to get elected and they shot him down, right in front of God and everybody. And then Martin, who was trying to bring everybody together, well, they assassinated him too. And then Malcolm finally changed and was embracing his white brothers and they shot him full of holes. So, I mean, it's like, we haven't seen that, and I'm not saying it's not bad, where we are today. It's a dangerous trend where we're heading. God help us in 2024. That's going to be a colorful year. But, I talk in my book about, regardless of what side I stand on an issue, I'm as close to middle as you can get because I work with both sides. You know what I'm saying? The right raised me, the left embraced me. And depending on the issue, I could lean either way, and this is how I am. I God bless the people that are conservative. I respect you. I know you. I grew up with you. God bless you. And the people on the left, it's like, man, I've done so much work with the left that I see you. I respect you as much as I can understand. And so, trying to be in the middle, people hate on that a lot of time. Pick a side, pick a side. But if we just choose, just the George Floyd, spark, boom, that, powder keg. What if it had gone this way? And this is just drawing from the great ones of the past, especially Dr. King. But what if everybody did hit the streets? But ahead of time, there was actually some intentionality and preparation, that, okay, we're here. Here is our, Dr. King, he said, okay, if you're going to do it, here's why we're going to do it. First step is information gathering. Okay. It's like, you've got to gather the information and find out, what are we dealing with here? What are the situation? Who are the players? What is their position? What's the history of this? Do we have the information about what really happened? All we have nowadays is a little video that goes viral and everybody hits the streets, start tearing stuff up. And it's like,
it anyway.
yeah, what are we going to do when there's deep fake videos that we can't tell anymore, where all of a sudden it looks like something happened? It didn't happen. It's not that hurt, right? I mean, get ready. And so, what if they did it like they did in back in the day, and young people mobilized and were trained, and we're not going to be violent because we can't get what we really, really want if we give in, and the oppressed become like the oppressor. Then all of a sudden you just have war, right? Nobody wins. And so, they practiced. Information gathering was the first step, and then negotiation. It's like, okay, now that we understand the issues, we've done our homework, as long as that phase takes, now we're going to go to the people that really can, bring about change if they're properly motivated. And we go to them and say, okay, here is what we seek. And there's demands, if it's defund the police, okay, regardless of where people stand on that, right off the jump, setting a precinct on fire, did not get anybody what they wanted. Okay, that's just not, but that was the strategy, because there was no real game plan. There was no leadership. There were no demands. There was no, pathway to success. There were no objectives laid out. What are we trying to accomplish? It was just like streets went crazy, right? But see, Dr. King would have done it. Now we have to negotiate, make sure they understand what we're seeking. Here's what a W looks like. And then if there's no negotiation, if it doesn't work, now it's time for purification. It's time self-purification. We're going to get ready to walk into hell. And when they start attacking us, we ain't going to do it, because we're going to arouse the conscience of the nation.
Yeah, it's
We're
powerful.
not getting off those streets until we get what we want. They're going to have to deal with us. And that's what Dr. King did. Because when the nation saw Bloody Sunday, Selma, Alabama, 1965, or they saw the streets in Birmingham with Bull Connor and the dogs and the hoses and the bottles, I mean, it horrified a nation, and it drove the president to come to the table and begin to negotiate with Dr. King. Okay, that is powerful. And then the last step is direct action. Okay, now in today's world, direct action is the first step. There ain't no information gathering. There's no objectives. There's just hit the streets and tear some stuff up and see if we get what we want. It's never worked one time. Why do we think it's going to work again? Keep doing the same things, keep getting the same result. So, I think we're living in a world now where people want things right away. It's a drive-through generation, right? Amazon, bring it to me today.
I want every generation
right
now.
Yeah. I don't want to wait 8 weeks to watch my show. I want to binge. I want to watch it in 2 days. So let me do it. Everybody wants things now, and peace doesn't work that way. It doesn't. You've got to really work for it. You know what I'm saying? And today's world, there's fewer and fewer people that believe in what Dr. King died for. I believe in it because the one I follow, he taught us how to deal with an enemy and how to really bring about sustainable change. And it's not through violent force.
We're up against it. So next time we talk, I really want to dig into these 7 pop principles, because the truth is they can keep us outside of cages that we create for ourselves in our own personal lives, in our friendships, in our marriages, in our finances. These are real life principles I love to kind of dive into and dig into with you next time, Kit, here in Wenz World. But I really appreciate your time, and we're going to post all the ways for people to connect with you. But in case y'all don't read the description in the comments on YouTube, check them out, kitcummings.com, K-I-T Cummings.com, powerofpeaceproject.com. Author, teacher, peace activist Kit Cummings. Always a pleasure to have you in Wenz World, man. Thank you so much for making the time, and the best of everything to you, as the good work you do is making a real difference in this world.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. You're always so good to me, and I'd love to come back anytime you want. I pray blessings on your work, man. Keep doing your thing.